Um, so my name is Joan Mealy McCarthy, as I said, and I am Executive Director here at the Summit School. And the Summit School is a school for bright kids with learning differences. Our kids come here with reading difficulties and, of course, spelling and writing and math and organization. Some of them have all of those difficulties, and some of them just have a couple. We're grades 1 through 8. When our children graduate, they tend to go to mainstream schools and graduate high school, of course, and then go on to college and complete college. So we're really proud of our students. The Summit School exists here not just for the kids that come to school here and their families, but also for the community at large. We really feel like we can offer services to children who do not come here, as well as information to parents and professionals. So this is a dyslexia presentation because October is Dyslexia Awareness Month. So welcome, welcome. I love talking about this topic. I've spent a lot of time working with families and children and working with researchers. So this is really near and dear to my heart. So I think please feel free to put questions in the chat box. And certainly at the end, we have time for questions. I look forward to sharing this information with you. And I think we'll go. I think Jessica is going to present for me so I can at least see some faces. Okay. So the title is Dyslexia Myths and Truths. To this day, despite the unbelievable amount of research that has been conducted on dyslexia, there are still major myths like seeing words and letters backwards. You know, and when I say to people, when they say, "What do you do for a living?" I say, "Well, I run a school and we work with children with dyslexia," and they have some kind of, wise remark about a word backwards, and it just kind of just gets to me because it's just not how it rolls. So tonight we have a few things that I want to accomplish. We're going to talk about defining dyslexia. We're definitely going to go through some myths and truths. We're going to talk about ages and stages of dyslexia, what you would expect to see at different ages and grade levels. We're going to talk a little bit about how you assess dyslexia. We're also going to talk about some key instructional components. So we have a lot on our plate. I want to say first that dyslexia is a brain-based type of learning disability, and it is a learning disability, but it specifically involves word level reading. Many times children get evaluated and the evaluation results would say reading disability. But if it primarily is decoding and spelling, and it involves children's ability to read fluently, then it is dyslexia. Not everyone will specifically call out dyslexia when they diagnose a child as having a learning disability. But basically what happens is you have children who just don't learn to read despite pretty good instruction in a traditional classroom. And, the expectation now, too, is that children have really hardcore instruction in reading in kindergarten. And many children come out of kindergarten reading, and some of them are just a little bit neurologically hardwired, a little bit different, and they really need that extra year for first grade. But certainly after Christmas in first grade, when children are still struggling with reading and everybody else in the classroom is reading, you have to start to wonder about what's going on. And if there's a family history, somebody said here, there's a family history of reading difficulties or dyslexia, then you can start out right then and there in forging the path ahead so that the child can achieve. So when we look at dyslexia, common characteristics are with what people call phonological processing, which means your ability to understand that words are made up of sounds and that those sounds are sequenced in a specific way and that they form words. Wonder Woman. Okay, so this is the one I was on. And then it also involves reading decoding. And if you can't decode what you read, if you can't sound out words, your spelling is going to be impacted. And then also with rapid retrieval of automatic information. So even though you know the sounds and the words, you know what the sound sequence make, but when you go to read aloud, your reading is very halting and it is slow. So go to the next one, Jess. So the next slide shows you, and I'm not going to give you a history on all of the neurological components, but it is a brain-based learning disorder. And all of the issues that are involved with dyslexia, the next slide, Jess.
I'm trying.
Oh, there you go. Are in the language centers of the brain. So the left side of the brain houses all of the language centers. And we are hardwired to naturally learn how to talk. We are not hardwired to naturally learn how to read. Most people, there are some kids who kind of learn through osmosis and read because they've been exposed to print, but mostly children need direct instruction. And all of the structures of the brain that we use for speaking and language are those structures that are used for reading. And it involves the speech motor area. It involves the language comprehension area, which is Wernicke's area. And it also involves the posterior part of the brain. There's a part that says VWFA, that's the visual word form area. And once you build up automaticity in your ability to recognize words, it is thought that that visual word form area is the area that helps build that automaticity. You can go to the next one. So what does the evidence say about dyslexia? Science has told us a lot about what it is, the brain basis, and also about student achievement and instruction for dyslexia. And today we're going to talk a little bit too about what should parents, physicians, teachers, administrators know about what the science has told us. Next one, please. Myths and truths, Pinocchio. So I always think about when I am in situations where mistruths are spoken about dyslexia, I always think about Pinocchio and his nose growing. But we're going to avoid the long nose because we're just going to talk about the truths and call out the myths. So dyslexia is the most common form of a learning disability. It's called a high incidence disability. And when we look at the special education law, which is IDEA, there are 13 categories that children can qualify for special education services. Specific learning disability is the category that children who have reading difficulties would qualify under. And dyslexia is a form of a learning disability, and I'll show you that in a minute. When we look at the 13 disability types, 33% of children who receive special education are those that are coded as having a specific learning disability. And you can see the percentages of the other. Keep going. So when we look at special education law, we look at the Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA. And in the law specifically, look at Section B. Specific learning disability includes, go back one, please. Includes conditions such as perceptual disabilities, which is an old term, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, which is like a 1960s term, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia, which is a language disorder. It's an oral language disorder with your ability to retrieve and use words the way you want to. In Section C, it says disorders not included. Such terms does not include a learning problem that primarily is the result of visual, hearing, or motor disabilities. This is also an old word, intellectual disabilities, and emotional disturbance, or of environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantage. Now you can hit the next button. It is that last phrase that is very problematic, because basically what that last phrase says is that environmentally or culturally or economically disadvantaged kids, or kids that come from non-mainstream cultures, just don't have a learning disability, which is just wrong. So hopefully with the new authorization of IDEA, whenever that happens, this whole section will be rewritten, because it is really steeped in 1960s terminology and philosophies. So let's go through the next one. The reason I showed that slide too is because many times And I think it's changing because many states are adding dyslexia laws to the legislation. But a lot of times, parents used to be told, oh, we don't do dyslexia at special education meetings. And that's just not true, because dyslexia is a type of a learning disability. It's a specific learning disability, specifically having to do with word level reading difficulties. Okay, keep going, Jess. So dyslexia affects about 10% of the population. Depending upon who you read, it's about 8 to 17%. Go ahead, Jess. Dyslexia is persistent throughout the lifespan. So it doesn't mean that you will never read for the rest of your life. What it means that it continues, that the processing issues continue, but with good instruction, you can learn to read, you can learn to spell, you can learn to write, you learn how to use technology. It is not a death knell, but the processing issues do persist through life, and you figure out your workarounds. Dyslexia does exist along a continuum, so you can have it in a mild form to a really severe form. About 2% of all people who align with the diagnosis of dyslexia have a very deeply intracted form of dyslexia, and it's very, very difficult for them to learn how to decode. And many times, it's a real struggle for them to even get to a 6th grade level of decoding. But in today's world, while it's problematic, it's not as problematic as it used to be, because we have technology. We have voice to text, and we are able to use technology to access print. But there are 2% of people affected who really struggle with even getting to a 6th grade level of decoding. Go ahead, Jess, next one. Children with dyslexia do not outgrow reading difficulties, but they need explicit instruction that includes phonological awareness, systematic phonics, and that's how they learn. So I always share personal, a little bit, not too personal, but my son, who's a grown up now, is an engineer, and he had a mild form of, and I say had, he struggled with reading in its mild form when he was growing up. And so, of course, I had tutoring for him, and he learned how to decode. He learned how to spell. His reading was always slow. He was never a fast reader. But he's a maritime engineer, and part of his work at colleges during the summers, they would go out to sea. And the first summer out to sea, he's gone, who knows where, Indonesia, I don't even know where he was. And I get a postcard. And I couldn't believe I got a postcard for my son that was, the whole thing was completed, and I read it, and there was multi-syllable words in there because he has pretty good language. And I read it twice, I read it 3 times, and I said to my husband, oh my goodness, look at this, everything is spelled correctly. And my husband just looked at me and said, Joan, you're just pretty pathetic. So, but my point of sharing how pathetic I am is to let you know that with good instruction, people who have dyslexia become quite literate. But there's things like processing, slow reading that may continue through the years. Go ahead, Jess, next one. So we know that there's neurobiological, it's brain-based. We also know that there are genetic influences that are attributed to dyslexia. And we know this from postmortem anatomy, neuroimaging, and genetic linkage studies. And the science on the latter two, the neuroimaging and the genetic linkage studies, are just incredible, and it's a lot. If you're interested in learning more about that, the Dyslexia Foundation, which is either yesread.org or the dyslexiafoundation.org, we do one-day conferences twice a year, and we simulcast them all. And if you go onto that website, you look at past conferences, you'll be able to see videos of the individual lectures at these conferences. And there's always a neuroscience lecture to start each day off, depending upon the specific topic. So if you're interested in that, you will really enjoy those presentations. So basically, what does this mean? It means that dyslexia is real. I mean, there was a body of, not literature, but some people who are saying, oh, it's really dystechia. There is no such thing as dyslexia. And that's fairly recent too. And these are professors in different parts of the country. And I question, my response to that is, have you picked up a journal lately? Have you looked at the neuroscience? Because dyslexia is real, and it is in the family. If your child is struggling early on and there's a family history, then you have a leg up. you know not to wait, because you know that probably your child is going to struggle in similar ways as family members did. Go ahead, Jess. Next one. There you go. Okay, truths or myths? The nose is long, so I'm going to guess you're going to know the answer. Go ahead, hit each one. Seeing letters backward, that is a myth. That it is not a hallmark of dyslexia. People with dyslexia just aren't smart. False, false, false. Go ahead, Jess. Children with dyslexia outgrow it. They do not. And only boys have dyslexia. Not true. It's about 50-50. And people who have dyslexia never learn to read. That is a big, huge no. So these are myths that still float around the world, despite the research and all of the press that we have heard about dyslexia. There's so many documentaries out. It's just incredible that this persists. Go ahead, Jess. Some more myths. It's a disorder of visual processing causing letter reversal and reading words backwards. Dyslexia is a language-based word-level reading disorder. So what does that mean? It means that the language centers on the left side of your brain are not wired in the way that it would allow the person to learn how to hear the individual sounds in the words, map a symbol on those words, combine those symbols, and read those words automatically and quickly. It is a language-based, single word level reading disorder. Go ahead, Jess. It is not indicative of low cognitive ability. I dare say the famous movers and shakers in this world who have dyslexia, Steve Jobs, Virgin America, Whoopi Goldberg, the Fonz, these people are brilliant, and they have dyslexia, and it hasn't stopped them from contributing to the world. Go ahead, Jess. A lag in development that will catch up. That's what a lot of people will tell, especially mothers of boys. Oh, he's a boy, he'll get it. That's what I was told. My son's birthday is in July. So, it was fine. It was not. We have a family history of dyslexia. So I knew pretty early on what was going on and what I needed to do. But that catch up really kills me too. So you don't have to wait till third grade to figure out if a child has a reading disability. We'll show you later on how you can figure that out pretty early. And if the family history is there, you can understand which kids might be at risk for reading difficulties based upon family history. Go ahead, Jess. It's not secondary to late birthdays, particularly for boys. Go ahead, Jess. And it's not the result of poor reading instruction. So poor reading instruction might result in a child not reading well, but as soon as they are in an environment with really good reading instruction, they'll pick up immediately. But if your hardwiring is such that you don't pick up the type of instruction that goes along with reading, then it's going to be a hard row for you to develop reading without explicit phonics and specific strategies that the science has shown works for kids who have dyslexia. Go ahead, Jess. And it's not a life sentence of goals not achieved. And I'm a mom here to tell you, and we've got hundreds of graduates here at the Summit School who can tell you that as well. So when parents first get that diagnosis that their children have dyslexia, it's kind of like a stab to the heart. Oh my goodness. But it's not. It's not a problem. As long as you know what to do, who to go to, and how to support your child will achieve it. Absolutely. Time and time again, we have shown that. Go ahead, Jess. So here's what dyslexia looks like. Difficulty with what we call phonological awareness, which could be rhyming, sequencing all of the sounds, just not with the letters, sequencing the sounds in words, telling what the first sound is, telling what the last sound is, telling what the middle sound is, and your ability to remember the sounds in words, to sound out the words from the beginning to the end and remembering what the word is. So definitely children who have dyslexia struggle at that oral language sound level. Written language mechanics deficits, spelling, capitalization, punctuation, and even the ability to just put all of the words in a sentence that need to be there. word level reading deficits, which means reading decoding difficulties, as well as sometimes oral and written language deficits, and sometimes even speaking difficulties. Sometimes kids with dyslexia just have real word retrieval difficulties where they can't pull out the right word right in that right moment. Sometimes they have persistent articulation difficulties that they just can't seem to remediate. And sometimes kids with dyslexia just don't get how to change those irregular plurals and that irregular verb conjugations. So childs might persist way beyond the age of 8 instead of becoming children, or rund might persist way beyond the age of 8 instead of changing over to ran. And there's reasons for that, but that's not, I'm not going to talk to you about that. I just want you to tell you that you might see that. Go ahead, next one, Jess. There is multiple evidence that talks about the weak linguistic ability to process speech sounds and words. And so when we look at phonological awareness and phonemic processing, this is what we mean: blending sounds to make words, segmenting words from syllables, making syllables into words, and then sequencing sounds and syllables and words, and figuring out how many pieces in this word as to the sounds and how many pieces in this word, or how many parts in these words as to the syllables. And then one of the key indicators is what we call the ability to manipulate sounds in words. So if I say to you, say the word house without the, you would have to say ouse. Or if I said to you, say tiger without the g, you would have to say tire. Children who struggle in this way just can't do it without specific, explicit instruction. And manipulating sounds, facility with manipulating sounds, or ease of manipulating sounds, enables you to decode a word, and if it doesn't sound right, you can change things around to make sure that the word fits in the context. Or when you're trying to spell, you're able to manipulate the letters with the sounds and figure out how that word needs to be spelled. So manipulation of sounds is really an important piece of phonological awareness. Early on, before children really become aware of print or they understand letters, sound correspondence, rhyming can also be a difficult piece with phonological awareness. So as the child works through this, you will see difficulty associating sounds with visual symbols or letters, and that's called the alphabetic code knowledge. So the first thing that happens is kids understand that words are made up of individual sounds, and then those sounds can be represented by letters. And so we know that with children who have dyslexia, they struggle with one or more of these components. Go ahead, Jess. So here are some things that we might do. We want to look at rhyming. So this is a phonological awareness. Children who have dyslexia, they're not that thrilled with Dr. Seuss books. They don't understand what the big fuss is because they can't hear that alliteration of sound. They can't hear the play on words, and they just don't get it. Or maybe if they do hear the rhyming words, it's a problem for generating rhyming words. Do the next one. And also with children, they just don't understand if you change a front sound or a final sound, you just change the word. So when you take the B off braid, it might become raid. Or if you take the BR off raid and put an R in there, you might hear that rain as you change the end. So as you change sounds around, you're going to get different words. Go ahead, Jess. And here's some more where we do a lot of play on words to have kids really understand that you can manipulate sounds. And when you change sounds around and change the vowels in the middle of words, it's going to change the word. And sometimes kids start to learn, not sometimes, all the time, kids start to learn that sometimes it's not one letter, one sound, it's two letters and one sound. And they have to kind of figure that out. And sometimes that sound makes different sounds. So the CH in lunch makes a ch, but the CH in chaos makes a k. So these are all the things that kids have to learn. And when you have dyslexia, it's very, very difficult. Go ahead, Jess. And here's another example of phoneme manipulation. Do the next one. So once again, multiple converging evidence. Additional cognitive processing correlates may be present in children who have dyslexia. Rapid naming can often be a problem. So when we say, here's some colors, color boxes on a page, name those colors very quickly. Or here's some letters on a page, name those letters quickly. Or here's some pictures, name those pictures quickly. Many times children with dyslexia struggle with rapid naming. And when they struggle with rapid naming, we expect that they also may struggle with reading fluency, because even though they may learn the code and may learn words to the automatic level, they just can't do it quickly, so that their reading may be slow. And a lot of times kids have difficulty with phonological memory, their ability to hold all of those sounds in memory as they're decoding or as they're spelling. Do the next one. So here's an example of a task for rapid naming for pictures. And it's just a few pictures that are repeated that you have to continuously name very quickly. Here's another task with color naming, and the next one. And here's another one with letter naming. And so you would say to the child, go back just a minute. You would say to the child, go back, Jess, please. Yeah, you would say to the child for the colors, you could say, okay, start with this one, the blue, and I want you to go along this line, and I want you to say these colors as quickly as you can. And for some kids, it's really difficult. Do the next one, Jess. Phonological memory, if you hear a word that's different or that's foreign to you, can you remember how it sounds? So like polyphemu, if I say to you, without you looking at the words, at the sounds and the letters, if I say to you, say polyphemu, could you repeat it back to me? Phonological memory is involved in reading, decoding, sounding at the words. It's involved in spelling the words. But think about it. Phonological memory is also involved in learning a foreign language. So if there's a foreign sequence of sounds involved in words in another language, and you have phonological memory difficulties, learning a foreign language is really going to be hard. Do the next one, Jess. So truth. Dyslexia is a complex problem. It is rooted in the brain systems that use language or produce language. So here's what we know. Poor reading, decoding, and reading fluency. Reading fluency means, are you accurate and quick? A poor ability to spell words, difficulty retrieving words. Can you say the word you want to say in that moment, or do you walk around it? Difficulty with perceiving sounds in words, which is the phonological awareness. Difficulty articulating words in some cases. Long ago, I had this little boy who came to me at the age of 4, and at the beginning of every word, he took off the consonant of that word and put an H. If the word started with a vowel, it still started with an H. You try understanding someone who does that. So it might have been his hexia, his a complex hoblum, has its hoots in the Harry Hasek Haynes systems. I mean, it was wild. The child, as I got to know him when we remediated his speech, it was not long thereafter that I had a feeling that this child was going to struggle with reading, and it was going to align with dyslexia. He is now, he might be an SES in the government, or if not, he's a grade 14 or 15 and highly successful. I think he's in his mid-30s. So sometimes speech production can be an indication of dyslexia or be a part of the symptoms of dyslexia. A lot of times kids with dyslexia have difficulty with those automatic facts, like remembering the alphabet names, remembering the number names, remembering the days of the week, or math facts. So I remember a long time ago, I had a little girl that I was working with, and we were doing letter name correspondence and names of the letters in the alphabet. And I would put the plastic letters out on the table, and I would mix them up. And so one day she said to me, but Dr. M, where's the LMNO? LMNO. She saw it as one big unit. But that's what happens with kids with dyslexia. And so we're still teaching our kids math facts, even though they can do complex math thinking. We're still talking about the days of the week or the months of the year. Certainly with my son, every now and then when I really want to aggravate him, I'll say, tell me the months of the year. And he'll say, just Mom, look at my bank account and you'll know I don't have to do that. So, but that's just what happens with the brain in this type of disorder. Go ahead, Jess. Truth, individuals who have dyslexia have adequate cognitive abilities and sensory modalities, meaning they can see and they can hear. They usually have been exposed to appropriate traditional instruction, and they have neurobiological activation patterns that are very specific to this type of learning difference. And it's called, when you look at different pictures of brains from neuroimaging, it's called a neural signature. There are specific parts of the brain that are not activated in people who are dyslexic versus people who are not. And then, this is the really cool part, when kids get really good intervention and they learn how to read, the neural signatures of the brain that has dyslexia and the typical brain look very similar, not completely alike, but very, very similar. So that just shows us from a neurobiological perspective that instruction works, and it works to the point where it actually changes brain patterns and brain activation patterns. Go ahead, Jess. Truth. Okay, kids can be identified or assessed reliably as early as first grade. And during the preschool years, you can predict who is at risk. So I venture to say, how many parents have been told, oh, we can't tell if your child is dyslexic till third grade? Not true. So I think I see somebody shaking their head. We know there's enough data, enough science to support what we understand about dyslexia and what it looks like. Do the next one, Jess. The exact skill deficits associated with struggling readers can be identified and quantified. And the next one. And evidence-based intervention methods coupled with evidence-based progress monitoring, meaning checking on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, can be implemented with appropriate intensity and fidelity. And intensity means, is the intervention happening enough? Once a week for 30 minutes for a child who is struggling with this is not going to do it. 2 times a week for 30 minutes, depending upon the child. If the child is very mildly affected, then yeah, but if the child has a lot of the other issues that are involved with dyslexia, probably not. And then fidelity is key. If you're using a certain methodology that science has shown to work, the methodology must be used with fidelity. You can't use a little of this and a little of that because it just won't work. And I also want to tell you that any kind of reading program that says you work with a child with a program for 6 to 8 weeks and they will be quote unquote cured is a falsehood. It requires a time on task. And so sometimes if it's very mildly affected, you might see with good tutoring after a year. But many of our children, it takes a few years for them to really start to hook into reading. And then once they learn how to read, they still might be slow readers. We still have to work on the spelling and we still have to work on the written language. So that for children with a pretty strongly ingrained dyslexia, it is a process over multiple years using scientifically based strategies and methodologies with intensity and with fidelity. Go ahead, Jess. So it can be comorbid with other kinds of learning difficulties. Go ahead, Jess. Oral language. So kids with dyslexia might also have what we call developmental language disability, which involves vocabulary understanding, ability to produce sentences that are syntactically and grammatically correct, or their vocabulary and their syntax and grammar might be fine, but their discourse organization might be pretty disorganized. And so it could be part of that profile of dyslexia. Jess. Motor skills. A lot of times kids with dyslexia also have difficulty with handwriting and also with written language, and depending upon how it is, the components of it, but a lot of times kids with dyslexia often have dysgraphia. Go ahead, Jess. Written language. If you struggle with oral language with respect to vocabulary and organization, then certainly your written language is going to suffer as well. Go ahead, Jess. Math. Some kids with dyslexia are math wizards. Not a problem. Those are our quote unquote pure dyslexic children. But there are many children who have a constellation of difficulties, including math. And so we might see difficulties with fact retrieval because you can't retrieve all those other automatic kinds of things like days of the week or color names. Fact retrieval can be a problem. Sometimes calculation is a problem just because they can't remember the sequence of steps in multi-step calculations. Problem solving might be really strong, but they just can't remember those calculations or the equations. So it just depends. But we have many children who struggle with reading and math here, but then there are many children who it's reading and writing, and math is a breeze for them. Go ahead, Jess. Executive function. The research is showing more and more and more and more that the whole constellation of skills involved in reading, decoding, spell or literacy, reading, decoding, spelling, written language, reading comprehension, executive function is kind of a backdrop against a child's ability to pick up all these skills. And while I don't have the time to go into it exclusively, and I think we'll have other opportunities to talk about executive function, Jess, I think it is incredible how the research is appearing now that talks about executive function's role in everything. For example, when you decode, you can decode simple words like cat and hat. And then you start to decode words that have those vowel teams like rain or shoe. But then you get words where sometimes a sound is one way and sometimes it's another way. And you have to look at the word, look at the context, and be able to shift, be flexible. Well, one of the components of executive function is flexibility. And so for some kids, it's very difficult for them to learn that shifting process for looking at a word and saying, can't be that one, it must be this way. And the fact that there are some letter combinations that have a couple of different sounds. And so it requires multiple exposures and lots of multisensory teaching to really get the child to understand that and imprint that. With reading comprehension, the executive function is right in there. So if you can't remember because your working memory is not that great, if you can't sequence well, when you read long, complex text, as you read, you understand, but by the time you get to the end of that passage or that text, you don't remember what you read. So executive function, it is really important. The research on it is fascinating and well worth the read if that's something that you're interested in. Go ahead, Jess. And then self-regulation. Oh, the box is too small. So self-regulation, success in school is all about self-control and self-regulation. So can you sustain attention? Can you not be impulsive? Can you keep your attention aroused? And that is really important for sustaining your ability to learn and to grow in a traditional academic environment. Go ahead, Jess. So key diagnostic indicators that are evident in the classroom. So when a child comes into kindergarten, the child that knows fewer letter names than peers is often the child, not always, often the child, if they come from a high print environment, that is going to struggle with reading. When we look at children that come from poverty or low print environments, knowing fewer letter names is not necessarily an indication that they're going to struggle with reading, because as soon as they are in an environment that teaches that information and those skills, because their brain is very typically hardwired, they pick it up. But it's those kids that come from a high print environment that have had repeated exposure to letters and books and reading that still know just a few letter names. Those are the kids that you have to worry about as they go on through kindergarten and to first grade. Go ahead, Jess. Difficulty associating the sounds of certain consonants with their letter names. So a lot of kids know that B says B and C says K. But then when you ask a child with dyslexia, well, what does H say? And they look at you, they don't know. What does Y say? It says Y, well, no. And what does W say? So unless the letter has the sound in the name, it's very difficult for the child to remember those things. And you'll see that in kindergarten, you'll see that in first grade with children who have dyslexia. Go ahead, Jess. Difficulty perceiving and mapping short vowels. Short vowels are hard for kids. They're just hard. And reading, you have to get through the short vowel hurdle before you can move on to other things. Otherwise, your reading is going to be halting and spotty and riddled with errors. Go ahead, Jess. Difficulty with decoding and word reading, which we said. Go ahead. difficulty with spelling. If you can't decode, you can't spell. Poor memory for facts. Poor word retrieval. Keep going. You can go quickly. And they may understand oral language better than print language. So sometimes when children come to when the teacher says to parents, child has difficulty with reading comprehension, the first question I ask is, well, if you read the book to the child or you read the passage to the child, can they understand it? And if they can, then the issue is not reading comprehension per se, and it's not oral language comprehension, but rather it's their difficulty with figuring out the words. Go ahead, Jess. They may perform much better in math, as we talked about. Go ahead. And they appear to be bright, yet they struggle academically. It's a total surprise when your kid gets to kindergarten or first grade that they don't learn how to read. And that's exactly what it was for me. Go ahead, Jess. So markers and milestones of dyslexia and early reading difficulty. Go ahead, Jess. Preschool, you may have difficulties in acquiring spoken language, word retrieval. Early elementary school, you'll see difficulties with breaking the alphabetic code, learning the alphabet, sound symbol association, reading words, memory words, sight words, spelling, written language, and oral language organization. Go ahead. Later school years, this is what sometimes people call late emerging reading disorder. But a lot of times the children who don't show up till about 5th or 6th grade, they have the early code, but the advanced code and the shifting of sounds and the multi-syllable words are just an enigma to them. So you'll see that they have slow reading rate, weak fluency, their comprehension is poor because they can't hold on to what they're reading because they're struggling with the decoding. And they have persistent difficulties with spelling and written language. Go ahead. And then adults, you're going to see those continued difficulties with spoken and written language. Do the next one. So here's the common signs. Go through the whole page. Thank you. So I talked a lot about this. They may talk later than other kids. They might persist with mixing up words like biscotti for spaghetti or lawnmower for lawnmower. Usually that kind of fixes by kindergarten, but when it persists into 1st and 2nd grade, that's very typical of kids with dyslexia. I talked about having difficulty with learning the alphabet, numbers, days of the week, etc. And they also may have difficulty telling and retelling stories in sequence. Go next one. Kindergarten to grade 4, that's single word decoding. Keep going, do the whole page, Jess. They might have difficulty separating out the phonemes in words. They will have difficulty reading nonsense words because if they have good vocabulary, those nonsense words are pure phonics. And if you don't have a good phonics base, then you can't figure out the word and you can't rely on vocabulary knowledge. They might confuse sight words. Definitely you'll see word guessing based on the first sound or letter. And they may show word reversals and substitutions, but that's not the hallmark of dyslexia. And then definitely spelling accuracy and reading speed are weak. Go ahead, Jess. Get the whole one. Okay, do the whole page. I talked about the late emerging reading disorders, difficulty with remembering the details. There's too many memory bytes spent on trying to figure out the words that anything else with respect to the text and the content goes by the wayside. And it takes a really long time to do homework. And those are the kids that cry at home. Those are the kids that need you at their side. Those are the kids that you have to write their papers with them. Those are the kids that you have to reteach the curriculum to them in order for them to do their homework. Go ahead, Jess. So when we look at differentiating between dyslexia and other reading difficulties, if it's poor reading decoding, it's dyslexia. If it's poor comprehension only, it could be specific language impairment or what it's now called developmental language disorder, or it could be executive function difficulty where you understand as you read, but you can't hold on to it. It could, if it's poor decoding and comprehension, it could be dyslexia and DLD, developmental language disorders, as well as executive functions disorder. All of them probably involve poor working memory, which is your ability to hold on to information in mind. If it's poor executive function, it might be what I call a sloppy reader, like there's holes in their phonics, spelling issues, sequencing issues, memory issues as they read text. And it could be some or all of the above. Go ahead, Jess. So evidence-based assessment of dyslexia, it's important for the teacher to describe the reading performance in real life. What does it look like? when the child struggles with reading. Explore familial and instructional variables and consider the biological developmental variables. You cannot assess and talk about dyslexia without talking about those three components. Go ahead, Jess. And then we do want to administer individual standardized tests. We do want to look at the patterns of strengths and weaknesses, and we do want to use data to guide intervention. In IDEA, the special ed law, it also gives schools the option to do what we call a response to intervention. So if a child is struggling in the mainstream environment, you give them like a 12-week period of either a more intense instruction or a little different instruction. If they don't respond, you can go to the next level. And if at the second level they don't respond to instruction, then they would go to tier 3, which is a special education. And so the law says that you could determine a specific learning disability in that way. I prefer this way. It's old school, and you certainly get more specific and detailed and quantifiable information in this way. Go ahead, Jess. What's not supported when assessing dyslexia? I think it may be eradicated, but for the longest time, parents would be told, well, there's not a big enough discrepancy between your child's intellectual abilities, the scores on the IQ tests, and their difficulty with their academics. And so basically the evidence supports that you can be a gifted person and score pretty well on your academic stuff, maybe in the average range, but still score in the superior range on your intellectual capabilities. And it will be said, well, there's not a discrepancy. You're not falling behind. You're in the average range. So using the cognitive referencing or the IQ score to determine whether or not a child has a disability based upon a difference in score between that and the academics is just not supported by the evidence, and certainly not what we do. We look at what the child is doing, and we look at the family history, and we look at the struggle in the classrooms to determine whether or not that child has dyslexia. Go ahead, Jess. Keep going. So I'm not going to go through that. This is just, in a perfect world, how is dyslexia evaluated? The pieces that are bolded are the things that we really need. But most times children get a cognitive assessment and they get an achievement assessment. I am a speech language pathologist, and I am fully rooted and grounded in the oral language basis for reading. And so there are certain components to a thorough oral language evaluation that really help inform the achievement results as well as the cognitive results. They all do work together. That's in a perfect world, and that would be looking at the whole child. But it doesn't always happen, and you don't necessarily need it, but certainly those things in bold print are the things that would be really important. Go ahead, Jess. Keep going. So here are the gotta knows. These are the gotta knows to understand dyslexia. So the foundational skills: phonological awareness and phonemic processing, blending, segmenting, rhyming, phoneme manipulation, working memory and phonological memory. Can you hold a multisyllable word in memory and repeat it? Working memories: can you hold information in mind and manipulate it and do something with it? Rapid naming and processing speed and word retrieval. Those are just foundational. When there's difficulties in those areas, you're going to worry that there's going to be difficulties with acquiring reading skills at the rate that would be expected. For reading, you're going to look at sight word reading, word attack. Word attack is reading nonsense words, which is very important because it gives you an understanding of how the child understands phonics. Reading fluency: how quickly and how many errors does a child make when they're reading? And reading comprehension. And the last one is encoding, which is spelling. So spelling goes hand in hand with difficulties with word level decoding difficulties. And then written language mechanics and written language discourse. These are the gotta knows if you want to know about a child who has this, if he has dyslexia, and what is it with his dyslexia that needs teaching. Go ahead. And these components form the basis for guiding instruction. Go ahead, Jess. So I unpacked it a little bit, probably a little more detail than maybe some people want to know, but phonological awareness refers to rhyming, sound sequences, sound isolation. Phonemic processing refers to blending. That could be real words or nonsense words. Segmenting, which is taking words apart, and elision, which is that phoneme manipulation. Say house without the h. Phonological memory is, can you remember a string of numbers? Can you remember a string of words? And can you repeat multisyllable non-words? And then rapid naming, as I showed you before. But always know, when we're unpacking whether a child has dyslexia, we always have to know what their oral and reading comprehension is. What's their receptive vocabulary? Do they get the main idea, the gist? Can they make inferences? Can they tell you details? If a child can't, if a child struggles with reading comprehension at the print level, your next step is to say, okay, if I read this to the child, what can they do? Because that's very important. Because if they can't understand at the oral level, then you know it's a language difficulty that happens with oral language processing as well as reading comprehension. So there's a diagnostic tree that you go up and down to really figure out what are the strengths and what are the challenges that a child might have. Go ahead, Jess. So if you don't have a full formal evaluation, if you're a teacher, you might want to say, I want to know if I need to refer this child on. So these are the kinds of things you do. You would give some tasks related to phonological awareness. Can the child say, if you say p, I, g, can the child tell you it's pig? Can you say to the child, tell me the sounds in the word hat? If you say to the child, say house without the h, can they do it? So if they struggle with those kinds of tasks, and they're struggling with early decoding and spelling, you start to, wiggle the antenna that are coming out, your teacher antenna that are coming out of your head. Can they do grapheme to sound identification? Can they tell you what the consonant sounds and letters are? Can they tell you the basic sounds, the vowel sounds, the short vowel sounds? And can they tell you the vowel teams? So once again, reading is about vowel sounds. If a child is not sound in their short vowels, their long vowels, and their vowel teams, they're going to struggle with reading. Decoding, you can give them lists of graded words, or you can give them lists of non-real words and see how they do. For reading fluency, you can go on the internet, and you can get timed graded passages, look at their cold read, and then let them practice a little bit and look at their hot read. So certainly reading fluency is a very important component to understanding dyslexia. Go ahead, Jess. And here's some examples. This is taken from phonographics. Phonographics has a screening instrument, and these are the kinds of tasks that you administer to a child. Do the next one. Code knowledge and blending task, and then you come up with a score. It's a weighted score, and if after you do the weighted score calculations, if a child scores a 90, below a 90, then they're not ready for grade level reading work. Do the next one. Here's an example of reading fluency. Reading fluency is a very important component to understanding dyslexia and reading disabilities, and it's also a very important component to instruction. So, and why so much testing? Because the data informs the instruction. Go ahead, Jess. So truths, instruction for dyslexia. It's not a balanced approach. So a balanced approach to literacy works for children who have typical brain trajectories. It does not work for children with dyslexia. Children with dyslexia need explicit, direct, systematic instructional methods in phonological awareness and phonics and spelling. Whatever you're teaching for reading, the child is learning how to spell. You don't give a child a different spelling list because it's just not going to work. Children have to have the multisensory, the input, the visual linguistic, and they have to have the output, the ability to write it and go through those sound sequences, sound letter sound sequences. Intensity of instruction, if a child is really, really impaired and affected, 30 minutes a week is not going to make the difference. And certainly for many children, they might get some good instruction 30 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. But if the strategies used in the instruction are not carried through the rest of the day, it's very difficult for many children. Instructional group size is important. One-on-one is not necessarily necessary. An instructional group size of 4 to 5 for children that struggle is quite adequate. And in fact, it enables you to play a lot of group games. If it's one-on-one and the child is playing against the teacher, the child knows that the teacher is going to let them win. But the motivation and excitement for playing a game is much better among peers. Timing of reading intervention, waiting is a problem. Do not wait till third grade. You can figure out in first grade if a child has a reading disability. And supportive instruction, having strategies throughout the day in the child's classroom, understanding that spelling is going to be an issue for the child. Having word walls around the classroom is really important. Voice to text when the child is reading is really important if it's not the actual reading instruction. So if the child has to read social studies texts or has to read grade level literature, let them listen to it. The instruction for the reading decoding is at a different instructional level. And to not enable a child to use technology for that more advanced content is really a problem for the child because it really restricts their learning. Go ahead, Jess. So here's a direct instruction framework: phonological awareness, sound symbol association, syllable instruction. There are different syllable types, and kids, it's important for kids to know those syllable types. Morphology, knowing about prefixes and suffixes. Syntax, grammar, what's a good sentence but versus what's not a good sentence. Word meaning is semantics, and of course, reading fluency. Those are the components that are really necessary for a good instructional framework and in a systematic way with children who have dyslexia. Go ahead, Jess. What should teachers know? They should know the structure of language. They should understand, hold on, let me unpack this a little bit. The structure of language means the sound system, how many letters in an alphabet, what those sounds mean, how those sounds are made in the articulatory system, why some sounds only come at the beginning of a word, what some sounds are derivatives from other language. It's really important for teachers to have that information. Go ahead, Jess. Progression of reading development. Where do you start and where do you go to? And most, I would say, most reading curricula have a progression of reading development. But if you go onto the Common Core, I think it is tab A or appendix A, it gives a pretty good progression of the targets for reading instruction, reading decoding instruction. Go to the next one, Jess. Differentiated instruction. When you have a large class, you know this, you can't teach all kids in the same way at the same pace. So differentiated instruction, how to do that in a way that's efficient, that is integrity saving, and that has an impact is really important. Go ahead. Assessment of student skills, knowing how on an informal level, how to assess what kids are doing, and also understanding how to read the standardized results is important. Continuous progress monitoring. When kids struggle with reading, you can't say, okay, I'm going to start this in September and then we'll kind of assess in November, because you may have spent 2 months doing something that doesn't make the impact that you think it should. So progress monitoring weekly or once every 2 weeks is really important. Many schools use Dibbles to help with progress monitoring. We use AimsWeb for progress monitoring. It really helps guide your instruction, and you can see immediately if a child isn't making progress. And if a child isn't making progress, then is it the intensity? Is it the strategy? What is it that you need to do to make sure that that child starts to progress? Go ahead, Jess. Classroom management systems, incentive systems are important. Go ahead, Jess. And then toolbox of reading instruction and intervention methodologies and strategies. Really important to understand the science of reading. And there's lots all over the internet, science of reading, and you can get some really good materials to help you understand. Go ahead. So here's, Jess, go ahead. Here's, do the next one, hit the next button. No, go back, sorry. So here's an example of understanding the consonants, the digraphs, and vowels. And we always give our kids visual arrays because it's not a memory task, it's a learning task. And so we always give kids, here's the letter, the sound picture. What could it sound like? And so this, when I was talking before about variation and flexibility, look at how the different combinations of sounds still sound like O. And it's very difficult for kids with dyslexia to kind of understand and learn those flexibilities. Do the next one, Jess. Knowledge of syllable structure. It helps children chunk longer words into parts. and it facilitates the kid's ability to understand whether a vowel is long or short or a diphthong or are controlled. Really very helpful. It helps students read longer words accurately and fluently, and it also helps solve spelling problems. So syllable structure is key. Go ahead, Jess. Here are the gotta do's. On my version, Jess, it was animated. When you switched it over to Google Slides, it didn't, but that's okay. Don't worry about it. So I'm just going to switch here. It's got to be evidence-based. It has to be sequenced and systematic. Has to be multisensory. The kids have to be doing things, playing games, up and around. They can't be just sitting in their seats. Begin instruction at the student's independent level. Very important. To put a child in the 5th grade who's reading at a 2nd grade level in a 5th grade instructional environment is just pointless, because they'll get only frustrated and they won't learn, and you'll get frustrated and upset because you just won't be able to figure out what you need to do differently. Have to know where the child is, you start them where they are and progress them up. Incorporate phonological awareness in decoding instruction, unless the data shows you that it's no longer or not an issue. Incorporate nonsense words into instruction to make sure that they're learning the phonics, and vowels must be solid. They have to be solid. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of inaccuracies and reading fluency difficulties. Go ahead, Jess. Seek 80% mastery at the very least, then spiral back to daily to get to 100%. But the research in the speech literature says that when you're working on speech production, if you can get 70% mastery in spontaneous language, you will see eventually that it goes to 100%. So we chose look at 80% mastery for sound, symbol, and for different word structures. Assign daily independent reading at their reading level at home for 5 to 15 minutes. Build in flexibility of the code. Just don't teach one sound, one letter, because that doesn't help children. They need to know that one letter has a variety of sounds, or one sound has a variety of letters that code that sound. Build in 30 minutes per day of code instruction at a minimum, not including comprehension instruction. So that's key. Build background knowledge and vocabulary. The research is really growing on that. That background knowledge is really important. So we do a lot of non-print media here to help build that background knowledge. Because if you can't read, how are you going to get that background knowledge? Well, you do it through non-print media. And then teach fluency as a component of reading instruction, not the means to teaching decoding. So if a child is struggling with decoding, you have to teach decoding, but you also have to do reading fluency practice on a daily basis. One without the other will not get you or get the child where they need to go. Go ahead. Next one. So here are some different reading programs or methods. WordSense is a proprietary program at the Summit School, which we will most likely be launching into the market in the next couple of years. But Phonographics, Orton Gillingham is an approach, not a program. Wilson Reading Systems is here. It's at least 30 years old. It's solid. The teachers have to be firmly trained, and all of these systems or programs have to be implemented with intensity and with fidelity in order for them to work. Go ahead, Jess. So how do these principles translate to everyday practice? So children can be identified or assessed reliably as a student who struggles with reading as early as 1st grade. And you can say that a child is at risk for reading difficulties when you look at certain characteristics of their language profile in the preschool years. Go ahead. The exact skill deficits associated with poor readers can be identified and quantified, and they should be, so that you know where to start instruction. And evidence-based intervention methods coupled with evidence-based progress monitoring can be implemented with appropriate intensity and fidelity. A method is not any good unless the teacher is well trained, and the method is implemented by a well-trained teacher with good intensity and good fidelity. Go ahead. So just remember, hit the next button. On the road of life, dyslexia is not a stop sign. And with that, we have time for questions. Here's an example just to give testimony to the fact that we have graduated several hundred kids from this school. Here are the high schools that they go to, and here are some of the colleges. So it's a laudable list from anybody's perspective. Do the next one, Jess. And we will send you a document with some of this information. So here's some helpful documents and some good websites, and then questions. All right, and also our Summit Resource Center, Elizabeth White, who's on the call, is our coordinator. And if you're interested in testing or tutoring, she will be able to help you. Nancy Rhodes is our admissions director, and she works closely with Elizabeth to really manage and make sure that our Summit Resource Center is providing service to the community. And if you're interested in the school, we do have an open house on November 6th, and Nancy can help you with that. So thank you for sharing your night with us. Thank you. Have a great night.